also the uniqueness of, the adultery laws, right? There's some in here about, if the woman cries out, if she doesn't cry out, that can impose, could be considered consent. But then, of course, also it looks like sex before marriage, right? If the guy goes with the virgin and then he has to marry her, right? You can't divorce her. And that's, of course, if she consented and didn't cry out.
Right.
So then it's a different story, right?
I want to point out what it does not say, which is something that I used to say when I was, an unbeliever and I didn't like the Bible, and I would, try to tell people why it was a bad book. I would talk about basically that the Bible commands that a woman has to marry her rapist. And that's, you'll hear all kinds of atheists everywhere say the Bible commands that a woman, if she's raped, she has to marry the man who rapes her. And that is not in this passage. That's not in the text. There's a penalty for a rapist. He doesn't get to marry the woman. And the English translations might lend themselves to that terrible argument because it talks about, if he finds a woman and he seizes her. But I don't think it's talking about, against her will, because it specifies whether she cries out or doesn't cry out. So if she doesn't cry out, she's not being raped, she's consenting. So I just want to point out another bad argument from our lovely friends, the atheists, which I used to be one and not anymore, praise God.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, we have the famous story of Dinah in Genesis, right? Where one of the Shechemite guys took Dinah. It doesn't specifically say whether she cried out or against her will or not, but the point I want to draw is that Jacob had taught all of his sons Torah, because we have lots of evidence that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob kept Torah so faithfully. This is why they're referenced as the fathers all the time, and why they're constantly being said that these guys kept the commandments, and the same ones were given to everyone at Mount Sinai in the same covenant that was given to their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob was considered a very righteous man who was to teach his sons the ways of righteousness, which would be the ways of Torah. And in that story, even though Jacob doesn't like how his boys go handle that, they're not condemned for that. In fact, they felt justified in going and killing that guy because of what he did to Dinah before they were married.
Yeah.
So it would seem to me, not just because of her age, but because that almost like there was a common consensus there that Dinah didn't want that.
Well, and I think there's quite a bit more of a backstory to that in Jubilees, isn't there? Where it talks about Levi actually being rewarded by the father for what he did in Shechem with the covenant of the priesthood. So it seems like there was a bit more going on legally with this relationship between Dinah and that man, and there were agreements that were made between the Shechemites. Is that what they're called?
Shechemites, yeah.
The Shechemites and Israel. And they didn't follow through with their
Jacob's boys wanted them to get circumcised if they were going to be in family with them through marrying Dinah, and that was the first rule, was if you want to be a part of us, you got to get circumcised. But we have the strict command that the Canaanites could not be a part of them at all. They were not supposed to intermarry with the Canaanites. So this was actually just a plot to set them up, so that after they were circumcised, all the men of that town were circumcised, and during that 3-day healing process. And if you go ahead on your own time and look up circumcision, so there's a healing process involved where a man may not be as mobile as he was before the surgery, so because of the sensitive area of the surgery, and that's when the boys of Jacob came in and killed all the men of Shechem, but they attributed it to defaming Dinah.
Right.
Okay, so that was kind of their initial motivation, was how they treated their younger sister, who apparently was around the age of 12.
Yeah.
So how they treated their younger sister was the whole motivation for them to do this. Jacob was afraid of any backlash in the region that may come from it, but Jubilees and even in Genesis, they're not punished. Right. In fact, they're almost commended for it. So just something to consider, that they're actually following Torah.
Right.
So no, a girl does not have to marry her rapist.
No.
That is a out of context lie from people who haven't read the Bible. Okay? So